Coca-Cola have urged their employees to be less white.
That is so stupid. That's the most ridiculous, horrifying story I've ever heard. It's crazy.
I would have thought you are either white or you're not. Is it possible to be less white? Maybe some people are less white than others. Barack Obama, for example, the first black president of America, it could be argued that he is half white on his mother's side. But I don't think it's possible to change one's own level of whiteness.
Is it because I was black?
Coca-Cola think that becoming less white is similar to being less arrogant, being less confident, and they seem to associate a lot of negativity with whiteness. So we need to look at the history of this concept. When did white people realize they were white? Presumably they had no idea until they met black people, and likewise black people didn't know they were black until they saw that they were different from white people. But in the modern sense of the word, the white race has since the 17th century referred to generally people of European origin, but at some points it has been a more broad definition and has even included people from West Asia and North Africa. And this goes back to the idea of the three races: the Caucasoid, the Negroid, and the Mongoloid. Mongoloid being the East Asians, Negroid the Sub-Saharan Africans, and Caucasoid kind of everyone else in between. So people from India, people from North Africa would be considered technically Caucasian, although they're not generally regarded as white within white society. And even in America in the last couple of hundred years, ethnic groups such as the Italians and the Irish even were not considered to be white people, or perhaps not as white as other strands within society. And in America, always it was the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who were like the epitome of whiteness, this upper crust ruling class. But how can you become less white? Is it possible? And why has being white got this negative connotation at the moment? Is it because we've come out of centuries of imperialist occupation and conquering of non-white people? In this post-colonial era that we're living in, there seems to be a sense that the colonial powers have reflected on what they did to parts of the world, and they kind of realize that it's wrong. But the British Empire was not the only empire in history. There have been non-white empires that did just as much treachery as the British Empire in the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire did many great atrocities. Do the Turkish people have this same sort of so-called white guilt? We even have a name for it, white guilt. Is there a Turkish guilt for the injustices that they perpetrated? I'm not sure that there is. I wonder, why is it that there is this sort of embarrassment about being white, given that for a long time to not be white meant to be other, to be second class, certainly in Britain and North America. But that's not the case anymore. And for decades, people would have attempted to pass as white. Black people who were light skinned would try to pass themselves off as a white person because of the advantages and privileges that would come with that. And now things are going the other way.
Well, I definitely am not white.
So are we living in a post-racial era or a post-white supremacy era? What are the advantages of being white?
You're a white man!
I'd like to know. List them for me in the comments. What are the advantages that white people have?
My son, the country's first black president.
I'm black.
Another noticeable phenomenon as being white has gone out of fashion. You'll read stories that seem to question white people's origins and want to portray the ancestors of white people as having not been white. Now, if the gene that produces white skin or a light complexion is some kind of a mutation that happened in the last few millennia, then of course the ancestors of the Europeans, the Northern Europeans, would have had a darker skin. But that doesn't change who their ancestors were. And the story of Cheddar Man being the first Briton, and this was an individual who seemed to have a dark skin and the first native inhabitant of the British Isles, but he also had blue eyes. So you're talking about different phenotypes, and of course, as we said, the concept of whiteness had not been invented then. The concept of the races and there being different races did not come about until 300 years ago or so. But that doesn't make the modern day British people any less a descendant of this Cheddar Man, if he was the first native Briton, just because he had a darker skin colour. And maybe we need to move away from the colour label because it's inaccurate and just talk about being of a European descent or African descent or Asian descent. If we want to talk about race, if we have to fixate on race and discuss it. And people did try this in America in the civil rights movement. There were people that pushed to change the definition from being black to being African American. But of course, black was a term that was reclaimed for a long time. Black was used as an insult, and then the civil rights movement and the black liberation movement reclaimed this term and said black is beautiful. I'd be uneasy about people trying to reclaim the term white as beautiful because of its history, but maybe it's time to embrace labels such as European or whatever your heritage is, whether you're an English European or an Irish European, a Cornish European, a Breton European, Italian European, whatever it is, whatever your culture is, celebrate your own culture, and you might be a mix of cultures, rather than fixating on the colour. That might be a good idea.